It changes quite a lot, and I think this is the really fascinating part about where the AI curve has gone in the past year, especially. Zip has been experimenting with and working with AI for the past couple of years. In fact, we in the last year alone generated 4.6 million AI insights with tools
Right.
we've already developed. But what this changes now is we're moving from insight and maybe some more concentrated specific actions to a world where the actions that AI is taking are much more complicated. The insights they're delivering are much more impactful to the level of, not just accelerating, but helping people make more informed decisions by collecting and servicing more information than ever before. But then also helping people take action. Not maybe not fully autonomously yet. We see a lot of people talking about it this way, right? But actually allowing people to move much quicker on those insights being delivered to them. Or put it very, very simply, it takes the work that you see in a standard workflow and flips the way you think about it. Instead of being completely human initiated, completely human driven, and moves us one step closer to having, almost intern level people be able to run through the workflow and present you with completed work that you can then review and do. And so what this changes though is that the way we start looking at every unit of work in a workflow flips from being something that's truly human led
Yeah.
to being something that can be increasingly, human reviewed and human driven, but not necessarily initiated by a human.
Yeah. I think if we back up a little bit and just talk about agentic AI, because that's a term that, we're going to talk a lot through the conversation. It's a term that's becoming more and more, um, familiarized, let's say, just socially across our personal tech stacks and our business tech stack. Um, what do we mean when we talk about agentic AI?
It's an important distinction, and also there's been a lot of discussion out there in the market about, AI agents versus agentic AI. They're not necessarily the same thing, although they're related concepts. Um, Really, the simple way I think about agentic AI is a system that is becoming more human-like, but really one that can perceive, analyze, and act based on multiple kinds of inputs. That could be inputs in the system or historical data. It could be external inputs like third-party data feeds, but also successive actions or tasks being done in the system. As one example, if a certain compliance regulation is triggered, you need to now, add different steps in a
Yeah.
workflow. You then go through that analysis, a breach analysis in the case of certain regulations. We want to be able to show a degree of what we'd call agency. That's where the term comes from, right? Showing that instead of just having concrete and repeatable tasks being done, that there's something more adaptive and intelligent behind it. So really, when AI becomes agentic, it's about injecting increasing levels of agency and decision making, and
Mhm.
maybe not necessarily full autonomy, but more awareness of what's being done instead of just doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as we start to think about the art of the possible, you talked about it's not necessarily full agency, but there's the human in the loop, as we would say, or even an expert in the loop that's guiding the technology, where the human kind of comes in at the beginning to scope what's needed, what we need an agent to go and do, and some of the things that you're doing at Zip is kind of taking you're building use cases on your own from all your experiences and all the interactions that you've had with all your clients, so that kind of takes some of that away. But you have the human at the beginning, then you have the agents in the middle, and then you have the human at the end, who is then kind of involved in making sure that the right outputs are correct, or the nuance that's involved in a particular process is correct. And a lot of the agent is doing the bit in the middle that is very time consuming, and that leads us to not have the time to do a lot of the things that we want to do. You talked about kind of an efficiency play. As you talk to folks within procurement, do you see a lot of excitement for agentic AI and what the potential for agentic AI is within their teams?
Well, I mean, I see a lot of excitement and it's natural. Um, but I always go back to the research that we're doing is that when we talk to our customer base internally or when we do research work outside with other firms, a universal theme we see is a desire to work on certain kinds of tasks or activities that always gets pushed aside. And, everyone has this in their daily jobs. It's the stuff that's, important, but not necessarily urgent. In procurement, especially in the conditions they face these days, are just forced to work on things that is both urgent and important.
Yeah.
But the stuff that doesn't get done, or even let's say the stuff that could get done but doesn't get done, that could be really valuable, it's still there.
Mhm.
And really, what I see as the excitement, and I hear from people about this, is um, there's that twofold element. One of getting freed from either monotonous or very painful work that prevents you from doing the work you want to do, but then also the aspect of um, reimagining what could be done. Are there opportunities that no one would have wanted to touch a year ago that we can now look at an applied case of AI and say, actually, an AI could gather all of that data, send out those inquiries, and then source, that part of the tail spend that we aren't really touching today just because we don't have the for people to do it.
Yeah.
I think that that's a step change, but that's what we hear. And then the thing that people get really excited about is when they start seeing this stuff in action, they say, "Well, could it do this or could
Yeah.
it not?" And then it gets their wheels turning a bit. I think seeing is believing, not just in the proof point, but also helping people rethink how they approach their jobs, how they structure their teams. And we're only at the beginning of that, but that's where the excitement goes. It becomes really a question of what's next.
Yeah, that I completely agree with that. Seeing is believing. I think that once you start to build yourself from the tools that you have available to you and you see what's possible, that I've had a lot of personal instances of my mind being blown. Of okay, so if I can do that and I can do that, and it only took me this long to figure it out, and these are the outputs it drives. Even in cases where the output isn't 100% of what I want, but now I'm only spending, a small percentage of my time on that task rather than a large percentage before. You start thinking about all the kinds of different other things that you can do and apply that to, and I think that's going to provide a really big opportunity for procurement teams, and a message that you you really need to be curious and experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And the experimentation part has been difficult for people because there's a lot of hype. There's a
Yeah.
lot of confusion. I mean, you asked me to kind of start with a definition, always a great place to start. But while there's so much promise, the thing that people are struggling with is making this concrete or tangible
Yeah.
to them. But also, and I'll point this out too, to their bosses. They don't want to be caught, just playing with a toy.
Right.
Really. They want to be actually delivering the ROI that they're seeing as a potential in here. And so I think the other thing that people are really excited about, at least in our conversations when we're talking about how we're approaching AI agents, is that providing very tangible and specific use cases is the really important starting. Even when there's theoretically a possibility of doing much, longer joint things like, multi-agent workflows or like creating potentially in the future something, more powerful like a super agent that can control all the agents. That's all. I think, it's certainly on our mind and it's on a lot of people's minds as if you're deep in this technology. For the people in the trenches day in day out, what they're looking for is a specific and concrete win they can get from this. And the more you can multiply that over um, different personas, different use cases, the more valuable it immediately becomes. It allows you to chain those benefits into something much larger over time.
Yeah. So you talked about that you have built and launched a number of AI agents that can be applied to procurement. But what are some of those use cases that you've seen interest in, and that you obviously have seen the potential to build agents around?
Yeah, so there's so many, right? A couple that I like to call out. Um, Zip really well known for, and you guys have been covering this for a long time, for creating and popularizing the intake management process in procurement formally. And one of the things we see, just like with any kind of request form that exists in software today, is that when you ask a requester to fill out a request form, they're not always going to do it right. They
Mhm.
might make mistakes. They may misunderstand, the certain commodity codes they may supposed to have to enter. They may misjudge something. One we often talk about is like, if you're doing a software request, does this software use personally identifying information? Often they'll say no, they just
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
You give them all the tools you want, but they might also have a document like a SOC 2 from the vendor that might actually really specifically call out how they're using PII.
Mhm.
And so one example is an agent that can look at that information and surface that discrepancy and say, hey, someone's got to check this out. Not even trying to necessarily replace it, but like certainly getting to that point of doing validation of data. And to the earlier opening question, I'm talking about like, human led versus machine led.
Yeah.
We have plenty of customers who, have nodes in their workflows where a human's going in and doing data validation,
Mhm.
which, a best practice. Providing a little automation to surface data, compare two data points, and then flag something, and either suggest a fix or bring someone in to make sure that that fix needs to be made. That's one example. But then there's so many slew of regulations that people have to deal with, and one as we work increasingly in other jurisdictions is DORA. Being able to surface whether potential vendor supplier falls under DORA, and then
Mhm.
based on that, help people understand, what needs to be done after that, what that's certain types of analysis they have to go after. These kinds of use cases are really about bringing specific expertise or really regulatory intelligence into
Yeah.
specific workflows, and you list a whole bunch of different use cases, but really helping people again not replace the idea of having to do all that work, but help with the categorization, the classification very quickly, and then also helping you act more quickly. If this
Mhm.
does fall into the criteria, then you're going to need to do X, Y, and Z. Let's add that to the steps. Let's gather that information as well. So in two examples, but really, the idea being we want to augment what's possible and also change the way we're kind of looking at the initiation of these different work streams.
So if the agent is going and collecting data, for example, from a different or from a specific source, that source may be an internal data repository, it might be an external um, one as well. Um, what kind of insights does it bring in? Where is it getting that information in from that helps then inform kind of the next step in the process?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's actually a really important one that informs, our approach to doing this is because Zip is an orchestration platform, we really rely on, and a lot of customers come to us for this ability to connect and integrate either third-party applications or external data sources, data feeds from third parties to inform their workflows or be able to help complete certain steps, risk calculation as one example. Um, so the way that we're looking at constructing and deploying these agents is by allowing different data sources to be part of the process that goes through decision making by the agent. And really, you're going to be able to collect, normalize, and then also um, inject those specific data points. Obviously clarified for accuracy, quality,
Yeah.
etc. But into whatever part of the workflow or the decision making process that agent needs in order to complete a certain action. And it's an important point, really, because if you look at, and this is getting, into the kind of technical weeds that I love jumping into, but like any agent, as outlined by kind of any firm that builds them, it always involves an orchestration layer
Mhm.
because in order to do things like use tools, gather context in order to make an evaluation of what to do next, it needs those external inputs, and that marriage of the internal and the external is two of those key components that you really need in order to get everything to work well. But then you need also that unifying layer of the orchestration to bring it all together.
Yeah, I think about ones that we were talking off mic before we started. I've been experimenting building them in our business, but also using them personally. And it's that platform that brings information from different sources, that parses data from different locations, that then sends it to a large language model to do an analysis on, that then sends it to a human waiting, like, tell me what you think about this and press a button. And that's kind of how you're building these processes, but you need that platform to enable kind of all these different interactions. And seeing that now at the enterprise level, um, is very exciting. I think it's really interesting when you start thinking about how do I deploy this.
Yeah, and it sounds very technical and complicated when you talk about platforms and orchestration layers and all that. But even just think about how you work in your daily job. Like you're running a sourcing event, you are before you're going to make an analysis and decision, you're going to collect all the information, go to that website or read that RFI. You're going to print out that report and gather it all together, and then you're going to analyze it. You might use traditionally a spreadsheet to do that, but you're going to put everything together and structure that. Um, if you really step back and think about it in non-technical terms, that's what the agent is also doing. But it just requires, more of a technical configuration and more of a technical approach because you're asking the machine to do very human-like tasks, actually. But we work in the same way. And that's actually the interesting part of it to me is that when you think of how we've usually used software to attack these kinds of problems, sourcing again as that example, it's it is the tool, but we're kind of feeding it
Mhm.
and structuring it the way we want. Increasingly, we're working with a kind of software where we're saying, "Hey, this is how I would do it. Can we replicate some of the way that I would do it here?" And again, it's not the same as a person.
Yeah.
And it acts and thinks and makes mistakes, to be sure, in ways that humans don't quite do. I would hope that you're not making up did information
You-
process. But really that it's a different kind of approach to working with a tool or a machine or software or however you want to call it, because it replicates more of the way that we work too, which I think is interesting, if a little bit odd for us.
Yeah. When you think about, because it can sound technical, if you've not tried to build workflows that integrate, agentic AI, it can seem intimidating. But I think the reality is when you try, you realize it's not actually as hard as what you may think it is. And that's actually part of um, the epiphany that you have when you start doing it for the first time. Could you talk a little bit about, the how? How do you actually go and build workflows that have, agentic AI built into them?
So the way you do this is that, at least I can speak from our perspective at
Yeah.
Zapier, is like you've got a lot of experience and capabilities for building whatever it is, like the different conditions into specific workflows, inputs, whether that's a form or a different data feed that's going to go in there. Really what you're going to start seeing now is this addition of specific AI actions or the ability to inject certain kinds of, areas for prompts into a standard workflow.
Mhm.
And any experience that you're gaining in your own life, you see a lot of people doing reports right now about tests of efficiency on piloting these tools. I'm hearing it a lot, even in conferences I'm going to. People kind of getting the top down mandate
Yeah.
say you got to use this
Yeah.
tool, to lose it the license. And really, what you're going to start seeing though is um, more concrete and specific, actions or types of, AI calls, whether that's, categorize this data, or write this art, write this response email, et cetera, and being able to inject that specifically into existing workflows. And I think that's a big point we're seeing of excitement for people is that um, some people have taken this like tact of saying they're going to be going into like an all-in one agent that can do everything for you. A lot of people feel confused about like what can it do or like how is it going to work for me? What talking about really what we call edge cases. In contrast, when you take the current existing processes that you want to either improve or involve automation in, and you actually enable those steps themselves to become, more agentic, bringing the agents into those workflows. It becomes a light bulb moment for them. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I know exactly how I could build that in, or I can see specifically what it's doing and what I'm doing. And that really, so we're talking about, changing the experience of building, much like you're talking about in your personal experience. I mean, obviously there's some adjustment; it takes some time, but as you adapt the way you're working with tools, you start to see actually specifically how in every instance where you're looking at a kind of unit of work, you start thinking, well, actually, could I try an agent for that?
Yeah.
And then you're going to be testing and iterating on that.
Yeah. Um, is there any kind of rule of thumb in terms of how you decide which kind of processes or tasks or requirements are actually appropriate to address through building agentic AI and workflows that are kind of agentic AI powered?
How do you decide? I think it's really a question of several different factors. It's obviously about criticality. It's also about, I've used this example like before with you on this show, but like who bears responsibility for the decision,
Mhm.
and then the feasibility of whether the AI should be reasonably able to do that. So, like, actually, I mean, side tangent on some research I was reading recently. The UK government did a kind of large scale study of use of, I believe it was Microsoft tools for AI across different parts of the government. And there's a really interesting divergence in the adoption trends. Is it all starts out like all of the tools in the Office suite are being used fairly evenly. And then
Mhm.
there's a divergence. Excel and PowerPoint go down, and Teams and Word and a couple others like Outlook, right, go up.
Yeah.
And very quickly, people figure out I'm not 100% sure that I want to use an LLM to do math in Excel.
Hmm.
It's not really working for me in PowerPoint. It's not really a designer of slides or doesn't know my workflow how to do this. And I use that point because as people use these tools and test the outputs before they actually implement them in live workflows, they're starting to find like the obvious findings of people who've worked with LLMs for a long time, which is it's great with text, it's great with summaries, it's great with synthesis. In limited scenarios where the right data is being applied, you can potentially use it for some like calculations, or you can use it to determine, oh, I need a tool for this. I should be using a Python script, or I should be using a calculator. But and so going back to your question, um, when you're looking at use cases and tasks to automate, it's a question of like, is there a lot of legwork that is being here that involves specific skills that we know LLMs are really good at. I mean, one thing we've been talking about a lot recently is adverse media. Like, there's just a lot of searching and a lot of data sources, whether that's like looking through a sanctions list or looking through a bunch of websites, and like you can do a lot of that. Anyone who's used deep research on any of the tools recently has experienced this, where the ability to collect large amounts of information and synthesize insights about risk from those things has become much quicker. And that's not going to be completely automated because someone needs to review that information and make sure the information being presented to you is indeed accurate, real. But as I use that as one example, but all of the legwork that needs to be done, especially in very text or information heavy use case, prime use case for an LLM. And you'll hear plenty of people much smarter than I am talking about this. Whereas, there are plenty of use cases for AI that are not based on LLMs. Like things like sourcing optimization, for
Yeah.
example, things people have actually been doing for a long time. That are different techniques and different approaches that are better for those to tackle too. So there's a little bit of an upskilling and education element for like which AI to which
Mhm.
problem, but bringing it down to the specific AI agent level in some of these workflows, it's really a question of criticality, responsibility for the decision, and then amount of manual work or legwork that is typically wasted that could be for the right skills of a specific LLM be applied in that use case.
And I think one of the things that make that brings complexity to kind of decisions of where to deploy is thinking about procurement process as a system versus a task. And what I mean by that is sometimes you're thinking, okay, how do I deploy this across my entire procurement process? And I have to do a complete rethinking of the way that I buy, or I have to enable, bring agentic AI into the entire process at the same time so that it kind of all talks to each other versus I just have a need where I have this repeatable process that I have to do every day that's a real pain. And can I just build something on its own that helps me do that one task? Um, when you see people's approach to deploying, are they looking at it from a systems perspective only, or can you look at this is just a pain that I've got to do this every day, and I'm just going to build one little workflow that's got a beginning and an end, and it's not particularly complex, but the use of agentic AI helps me either do that a lot faster or helps me synthesize some insights that I couldn't do before.
I'm seeing more of the latter. I think definitely so. There are some people who fall into the first bucket who get very wide-eyed and they kind of see the potential and they want to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
But when they get down to the brass tacks of having to work with this kind of stuff and and test and iterate on it, because
Yeah.
and that's really what we find is like it's not magic. It is like any other technology where you're gonna have to figure out where the best use cases are and how to get the right outputs and also the structure for your specific use case. I mean, a big finding I think we've seen in developing a lot of this is that um, you know, how user friendly and in what format things are presented makes a big deal to
Yeah.
people, especially in terms of trustworthiness, because we're talking about, in Zip's case, especially, presenting information to people who are not in the procurement department, that who might be an approver going near the workflow and actually need to make a decision. And helping them work in the way that they're used to working is just another factor here, beyond all of the more complex stuff we were just talking about. Um, but really, as we start to see each use case build on each other, you it's more of a bottoms up approach where you can kind of
Mhm.
chain wins until, over time, you're going to see, drops in cycle times. I think one way we look at it is like, a typical process could be in like 30 to 40 days before Zip. And then with Zip, it's, typically 10-ish to use a round number. But then it becomes 5 or fewer, and we expect the number to keep going down. And it starts from those little wins that go up and up as you find the synergy between different automations.
I think one of the things that brings complexity in procurement, I think it's also a reason why we may be a little bit slower to change, certainly in the past, is the complexity of our systems integrating with systems around the entire business. There are some tech stacks within a business that are pretty well siloed and contained within a certain part of the organization. But procurement tech stacks tend to feed into so many different other systems within the enterprise. How can we think about, well, I need to go and interact with an ERP here, or I need to go and integrate with a HR system over here, or a infosec system over here, and does that bring additional complexity into the deployment of agentic AI, or is it becoming easier where there's less kind of need for customization of connectors and APIs and things to be dragging information from different sources? Because I'm sure that when you think about certainly more traditional implementations of technology, that's been a huge driver of it just takes so long and it costs so much money to do this. Um, are we seeing where agentic is making that a lot easier?
So this is actually an area where, I mean, I've mentioned a little bit of this idea of orchestration being part and parcel to what agentic AI is, but it's a big reason why we feel enabled over the long term to succeed here is because the way that, this modern class of technology, procurement orchestration platforms has approached a lot of these historical problems is to tackle this as a key part of solving the actual
Yeah.
process problem. Um, to answer your question today, I mean, it's still obviously a big part of implementation for us. And as we build out AI agents across these different use cases and personas, integration is part of how each one is built because they can't work without the
Yeah.
source. So your ERP, HR, etc. Um, it's interesting if I think back to what I hear about 20 plus years ago, like user logins and how each application would require that specifically. Whereas today, you're going to actually more often than not log in with a single sign-on system.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to be relying on and needing to reset your password specifically with a specific system. Is one example, and it's an HR data set, right? But as we look at um, AI specifically here and where it's going, I think this actually becomes an easier and easier problem to solve over time because as we look at, and this is getting farther down the road for everyone, not just us, but like agent to agent frameworks. We look at
Yeah.
the model context protocol, which are all very fancy ways of saying like how do these AI systems interact with each other.
Mhm.
Um, People are building the infrastructure now to make these systems more easily communicate with each other. And that's going to actually become a net win for everyone because getting data out of even your ERP longer term,
Yeah.
or getting it from other systems because they've got their own AI that they're trying to make sure is actionable and useful too. My hope is that as we see these frameworks or protocols come online, it becomes this next gen version of how we share data. How do we have actions or actors for agents actually acting across systems. And really that becomes longer term a net positive for the interoperability of everything, which, as you know, we've been talking about this a long time, you have too.
Yep.
It's a major stumbling block for many of these deployments and getting the larger value we expect out of technology.
Yeah, and I think the last kind of question I want to talk about roadblocks, because data quality is always still remains a concern, and sometimes I think data quality is a excuse, and sometimes there's real reasons why data quality may inhibit the implementation of certain technology. You know, is the impact of agentic AI contingent upon the quality of your data, or is it part of the solution in terms of cleaning your data to then act on it? As part of kind of the workflow that goes into an agent going and finding the information, cleansing the information it needs before it uses the information.
Yeah, I don't want to try to evade, but it is both actually, and
Mhm.
I'll give you a couple examples. Like with data validation, we've seen it actually as a use case, as a way to highlight discrepancies and help you get to better data. And so, really, I think data that might be used in other parts of the workflow, the agent can really help either extract, structure, and validate that information, and ultimately help increase data quality
Yeah,
for specific and targeted use cases, not just universally.
yeah,
But I tend to find the whole data quality discussion as relevant, but often it's a little bit of a knee-jerk excuse.
mhm,
A lot of people who have made this foray into using AI already, including the ones that have helped really pilot it with us, um, know that their data isn't perfect and still work and still act anyway.
yeah,
And I actually think this is a really interesting point about the way technology has worked historically versus how it likely will work in the future, which is that no human goes into a sourcing decision, a strategy session with 100% perfect data, and yet they make decisions all the time.
yeah,
Maybe they're not perfect decisions, or maybe sometimes they make the wrong decision, but they're able to do it. And we want to with agents really start to think about this less in the old-fashioned way and more in the future-oriented way, whereas, maybe you can recommend a decision, or it can say, based on the available data I have or what you get of me, this is what we should do. Again, maybe not giving it full autonomy because that would be something irrevocable, but um, getting to that point where we can make a conjecture versus let's say, deterministic decision
yeah,
about what should or shouldn't be done. That said, also, I will point out too that, yes, your data, but, if you think more broadly about just like the definition of good data, the data doesn't always have to come from you. Sometimes the data exists in an external source that is the correct data point, that just because you didn't have it or you didn't maintain it in the spreadsheet the right way. I think of this with supplier discovery solutions all the time. There's several out there that
mhm,
have these kind of like golden record approaches. And they get the data from, the internet, from various premium data sources, and it's out there. So, just because your data isn't good doesn't mean that you couldn't also find a way to get the data somewhere else where it's already good or higher quality or enriched. And then, through orchestration, you should be able to bring that in to an agent's, task or workflow or whatever to be able to do that more effectively. So ultimately, it's of course a concern, but you do not want to go into learning about piloting and ultimately implementing AI agents with this knee-jerk reaction that the data quality and volume has to be there, because even in some small cases, it doesn't necessarily need to be. You could also use it as something that could help you incrementally get there. And then you don't want to be limited by, let's call it, a historical approach to how some of these technologies have worked, to how other tools have worked,
mhm.
that will change as the structure of these technologies ultimately adapt or are, built out over time.
Yeah, and you talked about kind of on the as you were talking, I was thinking about CRM, customer relationship management platforms, for example. Information is out there, as you said, it just resides in third parties, much as it does within the procurement space. It's relatively straightforward today to use agentic AI to actually going and validate the information that you've got using third party data sources, and validate, enrich. So agents are part of the solution in terms of ensuring that you have, as accurate information as you possibly can have. That may not just be information that you hold, but that's information that's, as you say, kind of purchasable from external data sources that's already been validated and enriched, and that you can just bring into your tool.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, I know it's about time to wrap up, so I want to thank you so much. I know we're going to be talking a lot more about agentic AI in the coming weeks and months, because it's truly transformational for all of us, from our personal lives, but also our business lives. What we'll do is we'll include a link in the show notes for today's episode, both to your LinkedIn profile, but also to details on the agents that Zip has announced and launched. And folks can go check that out, explore, and reach out to you if they have any questions.
Okay. Thanks, as always. Oh, great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nick. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.